Jake Morrison pressed his face against the small window of the transport ship and watched the planet grow larger below them. Kepler 442c looked beautiful from up here. Purple clouds swirled around the surface like cotton candy. Bright crystals caught the light from the system's twin suns and sparkled like diamonds across the continents. He had seen many worlds during his 8 years as a soldier, but none quite like this one. The planet spun slowly beneath their ship, showing off mountains that reached impossible heights and oceans that glowed with strange light. It looked like paradise. Jake knew better. Paradise did not get classified as a Class 13 Deathworld. 5 minutes to drop zone, called out Captain Ben Rodriguez from the front of the transport. Ben had been Jake's best friend since basic training. They had served together on 3 different campaigns against alien forces. Ben was the kind of officer who remembered every soldier's name and birthday. Jake trusted him with his life. The transport bay filled with the sound of soldiers checking their gear one last time. 200 men and women from Earth's finest military units sat in neat rows, their faces serious behind helmet visors. Mixed in with the humans were troops from other species in the Galactic Coalition. Tall, blue-skinned Altarians with their forearms made excellent marksmen. The rock-like granites could carry heavy weapons that would crush a human. Everyone had volunteered for this mission. Colonel Lisa Grant stood up at the front of the bay. She was a small woman, barely 5 feet tall, but every soldier in the transport respected her. She had led successful campaigns on 12 different worlds. Her tactical skills were legendary throughout the Coalition forces. "Listen up, people," Colonel Grant's voice carried clearly through the comm system. "Our job here is simple. We go down, we secure a perimeter around the mining zone, and we hold it for 6 months. The automated extractors will do the hard work of pulling trilithium out of the ground. We just need to make sure nothing interferes with them." Jake checked his demolitions kit for the 10th time. Shaped charges, remote detonators, and breaching equipment filled his pack. As the squad's explosives expert, his job was to clear obstacles and create defensive positions. The weight of the equipment felt familiar and comforting on his shoulders. "The planet's atmosphere is corrosive," Colonel Grant continued. "Keep your suits sealed at all times. The weather changes fast and hard. Temperature swings of over 100 degrees are common. The local wildlife is aggressive and adapted to extreme conditions. Stay alert, stay together, and follow your squad leaders." Lieutenant Amy Foster sat across from Jake, reviewing data on her tablet. She was the mission's xenobiologist and medic. At 26, she was young for an officer, but her expertise in alien life forms had saved lives on previous missions. She looked up from her readings and caught Jake's eye. "The initial scans show some interesting life signs down there," she said quietly. "Large predators, definitely. But the energy signatures are strange, almost like the whole ecosystem is connected, somehow." "Connected how?" Jake asked. "I'm not sure yet. The readings don't match anything in our databases. We'll know more once we're on the ground." Sergeant Pete Collins laughed from his seat nearby. The heavy weapons specialist was cleaning his plasma rifle with practiced movements. "Doesn't matter how connected they are. A few rounds from this, baby will disconnect them permanently." Pete was a career soldier, 15 years in the service. He had a wife and 2 kids back on Earth, and pictures of them taped inside his helmet. Jake had seen Pete hold defensive positions against impossible odds. If anyone could handle whatever was waiting down there, it was Pete. The transport shuddered as it entered the planet's atmosphere. Through the windows, Jake could see the purple clouds closing around them. Lightning flashed in colors that did not exist on Earth. Green, silver, and deep red bolts danced between the cloud layers. "Atmospheric composition is within acceptable limits," called out the pilot. "But I'm reading some unusual electromagnetic activity. Could interfere with communications once we're on the surface." Captain Rodriguez nodded. "We'll establish relay stations as soon as we land. Maintain contact with the fleet at all costs." The transport broke through the cloud layer, and Jake got his first clear look at their destination. The landscape below was unlike anything he had ever seen. Twisted trees with metallic bark reached toward the sky like grasping fingers. Rivers of what looked like liquid mercury wound between hills covered in crystal formations that pulsed with internal light. "Landing zone is clear," reported the pilot. "Touching down in 30 seconds. Jake felt his stomach drop as the transport descended rapidly. The landing thrusters fired, filling the bay with vibration and noise. Through the window, he could see other transports landing nearby, kicking up clouds of purple dust that sparkled in the alien sunlight. The transport touched down with a solid thump. Colonel Grant stood up immediately. "Remember your training, people. This is a hostile environment from the moment we step outside. Squad leaders, get your people organized and establish a perimeter. Rodriguez, get those communication arrays up as fast as possible." Jake grabbed his gear and moved toward the exit ramp with the rest of his squad. The ramp lowered with a hydraulic hiss, and immediately he could smell the alien air through his suit's filters. It smelled like hot metal and something organic that he could not identify. The ground outside was covered in a fine purple sand that crunched under their boots. Strange plants with glass-like leaves grew in patches around the landing zone. Every surface seemed to shimmer with an oily film that made Jake's eyes water even through his visor. "Air temperature is 42 degrees Celsius, reported Lieutenant Foster, checking her instruments. "Humidity is at 90%. The atmospheric pressure is 0.8 standard, so breathing won't be a problem if your suit fails, but the chemical composition will burn your lungs in minutes." Jake began setting up demolition charges around the perimeter, while other soldiers established defensive positions. The crystal formations were beautiful but made him nervous. They seemed to pulse with their own rhythm, like a slow heartbeat. When he got close to them, his equipment readings went wild. As the day progressed, more equipment and supplies were unloaded from the transports. The automated mining extractors were massive machines that would dig deep into the planet's crust to reach the trilithium deposits. Each one was worth more than most planets' entire military budgets. By evening, they had established a decent defensive perimeter around the mining zone. Watchtowers with automated sensors covered the approaches. Supply depots were dug into the ground and reinforced with portable barriers. It looked like any other military base Jake had helped build on a dozen different worlds. But something felt wrong. Jake could not put his finger on it, but the planet felt like it was watching them. Every time he looked at the tree line or the crystal formations, he had the feeling that something was looking back. The local wildlife stayed hidden, but he could sense movement in the shadows. As the twin suns set, the temperature began dropping fast. Within an hour, it fell from 42 degrees to -38. The sudden change made the metal equipment contract and pop with loud noises that echoed across the camp. "This place is trying to kill us already," Pete muttered over the comm as he adjusted his thermal settings. Jake settled into his watch position and stared out at the alien landscape. In the distance, something large moved between the twisted trees. It was too far away to make out details, but it was definitely alive and definitely watching their camp. The first night on Kepler 442c was about to begin, and Jake Morrison had a feeling it was going to be a very long 6 months. Jake woke up to screaming. He rolled out of his sleeping bag and grabbed his rifle in one smooth motion. The screaming was coming from the communication tent. It was Captain Rodriguez. But Jake had never heard Ben make sounds like that before. The noise was high and desperate, like an animal caught in a trap. "Contact! Contact!" someone shouted over the camp radio. "We have hostile contact at the north perimeter." Jake ran toward the sound of gunfire. Other soldiers were emerging from their shelters, weapons ready. The camp's floodlights cut through the darkness, creating harsh shadows between the equipment and supply crates. At the north fence, Sergeant Collins was firing his heavy plasma rifle into the darkness beyond the perimeter. Bright energy bolts lit up the night, but Jake could not see what Pete was shooting at. The muzzle flashes revealed glimpses of movement, but nothing solid. "What are we shooting at?" Jake called out as he reached the defensive line. "I don't know," Pete shouted back without stopping his fire. "Something big. Maybe 8 feet tall." It was right there, then it just vanished. Lieutenant Foster appeared beside them with her medical kit. "Where's Captain Rodriguez? I heard him screaming." Jake pointed toward the communication tent. He was in there when it started. They found Ben sitting on the ground next to his radio equipment. His face was pale and his hands were shaking. There were no visible injuries, but his eyes had the distant look that Jake recognized from soldiers who had seen too much combat. "Ben, what happened?" Colonel Grant knelt beside him. her voice calm but urgent. "The patrol," Ben whispered. "Alpha. Squad went out 2 hours ago to check the mining site. They were reporting normal status every 30 minutes. Then the screaming started coming through the radio." He pointed at the communication device with a trembling finger. "It wasn't human screaming, Colonel. It was something else. Something that learned how to scream like us." Colonel Grant picked up the radio headset and listened. Jake could hear faint sounds coming through the speaker. It sounded like voices, calling for help, but there was something wrong with them. The words were right, but the tone was off, like someone trying to copy human speech without understanding what it meant. "Alpha Squad, report your status." Colonel Grant spoke into the microphone. The response came immediately. "Help us. Please help us. We are trapped in the caves." Jake felt cold despite his heated suit. Alpha Squad consisted of 4 experienced soldiers. The voice on the radio sounded like Corporal Davis, but something was wrong with it. The speech was too slow, too careful, like someone reading from a script. "Alpha Squad, what is your exact location?" Colonel Grant asked. "The caves. The deep caves. Come help us. Come alone." Colonel Grant switched off the radio. "That's not Alpha Squad." Pete stopped shooting and looked back at them. "Whatever was out here is gone now, but I swear I hit it at least 3 times. Plasma bolts went right through it like it wasn't there." Dawn came slowly on Kepler 442c. The twin suns rose through the purple atmosphere, casting everything in strange light. Jake joined the search party that Colonel Grant organized to find Alpha Squad. 8 soldiers moved carefully toward the mining site where the patrol had last reported in. They found Alpha Squad's equipment scattered around a cluster of crystal formations. Weapons, armor pieces, and communication gear lay in the purple sand, like discarded toys, but there were no bodies, there was no blood. It was as if 4 fully armed soldiers had simply vanished. "Look at this," Lieutenant Foster called out. She was kneeling beside one of the crystal formations, studying the ground, with her scanner. "There are tracks here, but they're strange." Jake looked where she was pointing. In the soft sand around the crystals, he could see footprints. They were roughly human-sized, but wrong in subtle ways. The toes were too long, the heel was too narrow, and there seemed to be an extra digit on each foot. "Follow them," Colonel Grant ordered. The tracks led away from the mining site toward a rocky area that had not shown up on their orbital surveys. As they got closer, Jake could see that what had looked like natural rock formations from a distance were actually the entrances to caves. Dozens of dark openings led down into the planet's crust. The geological surveys didn't show any cave systems. "Here," Lieutenant Foster said, checking her data pad. "The surveys were wrong," Colonel Grant replied grimly. The tracks led directly to the largest cave entrance. Jake approached carefully, his demolition charges ready. The opening was about 10 feet wide and disappeared into darkness that their lights could not penetrate. Cold air flowed out of the cave, carrying a smell that reminded Jake of rotting metal. "Movement," Pete whispered, raising his weapon. Jake saw it too. Something large was moving in the depths of the cave. As he watched, a shape detached itself from the darkness and moved toward the entrance. It was roughly human-sized, but moved wrong, like a person trying to walk with broken bones. The thing stepped into the light, and Jake's blood turned to ice. It looked almost human at first glance. 2 arms, 2 legs, a head in the right place. But the proportions were wrong. The arms were too long, hanging down past where the knees should be. The head was elongated, stretching back like an egg. And the skin had a metallic sheen that reflected their lights like polished chrome. Most disturbing of all, it was wearing pieces of Alpha Squad's equipment, a helmet that was too small for its elongated head, body armor that did not fit its alien frame, dog tags hanging around its neck like jewelry. "Help us," the creature said in Corporal Davis's voice. "We are trapped. Come help us." The voice was perfect. Every inflection, every accent was exactly right. If Jake had heard it over the radio, he would have sworn it was Davis speaking. But seeing it come from that inhuman throat made his skin crawl. "Fire," Colonel Grant ordered. The soldiers opened up with everything they had. Plasma bolts, projectile rounds, and energy beams filled the air. The creature did not try to dodge. It stood there and let the weapons fire hit it, and Jake watched, in horror as the shots passed right through its body without causing any damage. The creature looked down at itself, then back at the soldiers. It tilted its head like a curious dog. "Come help us," it repeated, then turned and walked back into the cave. Within seconds, it had vanished into the darkness. "What the hell was that thing?" Pete asked, lowering his weapon. Lieutenant Foster was studying her scanner readings. "The energy signatures are incredible. It's like the creature exists in multiple dimensions at once. That's why our weapons pass through it." "Can we hurt it?" Colonel Grant asked. "I don't know. Maybe with the right frequency of energy weapon. Or maybe physical attacks work better than energy weapons. I need more data." As they stood there discussing tactics, Jake heard something that made his blood freeze. From deep in the cave system came the sound of human voices. Not one voice, but dozens, all calling for help, all using the voices of soldiers Jake recognized. He heard Davis, Martinez, Thompson, and Williams, all members of Alpha Squad, all dead, but somehow still calling out from the darkness below. "We need to get back to base," Colonel Grant said. "Now." They retreated toward the camp, but Jake could not shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every shadow seemed to hide movement. Every crystal formation looked like it might conceal a waiting predator. As they reached the perimeter, Lieutenant Foster grabbed Jake's arm. "Look at the crystals around our camp," she said. Jake looked where she was pointing. The crystal formations that had been pulsing slowly the day before were now flashing rapidly. The light was brighter, more urgent, like a heartbeat that had sped up from fear or excitement. "They're connected," Foster said quietly. "The whole planet is connected, and I think it knows we're here." That night, Jake took the first watch. He stared out at the alien landscape and listened to the sounds coming from the cave system. Human voices calling for help. Friends he had known for years, now dead, but still speaking. As the night wore on, the voices got closer. The attack came at dawn when the guard shift was changing. Jake was walking toward his watch position when the first scream cut through the morning air. He spun around to see Sergeant Collins firing wildly at something that kept appearing and disappearing like smoke. The creatures were inside the camp perimeter. "Contact inside the wire," Jake shouted into his radio as he ran toward the sound of gunfire. Around him, soldiers were emerging from their shelters, but many never made it out alive. The creatures moved like ghosts. They would appear solid for just long enough to kill a soldier, then fade away before anyone could return fire. Jake watched Private Johnson get torn apart by claws that seemed to materialize from thin air. The young soldier's screams lasted only seconds before the creature vanished again. Jake pulled the pins on 2 grenades and threw them toward a cluster of the things near the supply depot. The explosions lit up the dawn sky, but when the smoke cleared, the creatures were gone. Only human bodies remained scattered across the purple sand. "Fall back to the command bunker," Colonel Grant's voice crackled over the radio. "All units fall back now." Jake helped Lieutenant Foster drag a wounded soldier toward the bunker, while Pete provided covering fire. The creatures seemed to be everywhere at once. Every shadow could hide death. Every piece of equipment could conceal an enemy. As they reached the reinforced command post, Jake counted the survivors. Out of 200 soldiers who had landed 3 days ago, only about 60 remained alive. The rest had vanished during the night or died in the dawn attack. "They're learning," Foster said as she treated the wounded. "They study our defenses, find the weak points, then strike when we're most vulnerable." Colonel Grant was coordinating with the fleet through the long-range radio. Her face was grim as she listened to the reports from orbit. "The solar storm is getting worse," she announced to the group. "No shuttles can launch for at least 2 weeks, maybe longer." Jake felt his stomach drop. 2 weeks was an eternity when, facing an enemy they could barely hurt. He looked around at the frightened faces of his fellow soldiers and realized many of them were thinking the same thing. "Ma'am," Captain Rodriguez spoke up from his communication station. "I'm receiving signals from multiple locations around the planet. It sounds like distress calls from our people, but I know for certain those soldiers are dead." Grant walked over to listen. The radio crackled with familiar voices calling for rescue. Jake recognized at least a dozen soldiers who had died in the past 3 days, all begging for help in their own voices. They're using our dead against us, Grant said quietly. Psychological warfare. The next attack came 2 hours later. This time the creatures tried a different approach. Instead of appearing and disappearing randomly, they maintained solid form and attacked in coordinated groups. Jake realized they were testing different tactics to see what worked best against human defenses. Pete's heavy weapons finally began to have some effect when the creatures stayed solid. His plasma rifle cut down 3 of them before the rest faded away. But the cost was high. Every successful defense seemed to teach the creatures something new about human weaknesses. "We can't stay here," Jake told Colonel Grant during a brief pause in the fighting. "They know this position too well now. We need to move." Grant studied the tactical maps on her tablet. "There's a rock formation about 5 kilometers north. Natural defensive advantages. Only 2 ways in or out." Jake knew the place she meant. He had spotted it during the orbital surveys before landing. It would be a difficult position to reach while under attack, but it might be their only chance. "I'll lead an advance team to scout the route," Jake volunteered. "Take Foster with you," Grant ordered. "We need to know if there are any cave systems near that position." Jake and Foster moved out during the next lull in the fighting. They traveled light, carrying only essential gear and enough explosives to clear obstacles. The journey across the alien landscape was nerve-wracking. Every crystal formation could hide an ambush. Every shadow could conceal death. Halfway to their destination, Foster's scanner began picking up unusual readings. "Jake, look at this," she said, stopping beside a cluster of the glowing crystals. The formations were different here. Instead of the simple geometric shapes they had seen before, these crystals formed complex patterns that looked almost like circuit boards. They pulsed with light in synchronized sequences that reminded Jake of computer code. "It's a network," Foster whispered in amazement. "The entire planet is connected through these crystal formations. They're like a nervous system." Jake studied the patterns. As a demolitions expert, he understood how systems worked together. If these crystals were really connected across the planet, then destroying key nodes might disrupt the whole network. "Can we hurt it?" he asked. Foster ran more scans. "Maybe, if we could find the right frequency or use enough conventional explosives, but we'd need to hit multiple points simultaneously." Before Jake could respond, they were surrounded. A dozen of the creatures materialized around them, forming a perfect circle. But these were different from the ones they had fought before. They looked more solid, more real, and they were wearing the complete uniforms of dead soldiers. The creature directly in front of Jake wore Corporal Davis's uniform and equipment. It even had Davis's face, though the features were slightly wrong, like a photograph that had been stretched. "Jake Morrison," it said in Davis's voice. "We have been waiting for you." Jake raised his rifle, but the creature held up a hand that looked exactly like Davis's hand. "Do not shoot," it continued. "We wish to talk." "You killed Davis," Jake said through gritted teeth. "We absorbed Davis," the creature replied. "He is part of us now. All of your dead are part of us. We know your tactics. We know your fears. We know your names." Foster was slowly reaching for her scanner while the creatures talked. Jake kept his rifle trained on the Davis thing, ready to fire at the first sign of hostility. "What do you want?" Jake asked. "This is our world," the creature said. "You came to take from us. We defend what is ours." "We're soldiers following orders," Jake replied. "We didn't choose this fight. Choice is irrelevant. You are here. You threaten our existence. You must be stopped." The creature that looked like Davis tilted its head in an unnaturally precise movement. "But you interest us, Jake Morrison. You adapt faster than the others. You learn our patterns. You are becoming like us." Jake felt a chill that had nothing to do with the planet's cold atmosphere. He had noticed changes in himself over the past few days. His reflexes were faster. His ability to sense danger had improved dramatically. He had begun to predict the creature's attacks before they happened. "We offer you a choice," the Davis thing continued. "Join us willingly, and your death will be quick. Fight us, and we will take you piece by piece until nothing of Jake Morrison remains." Jake's answer was to pull the trigger. His plasma bolt passed harmlessly through the creature, but at least it broke up their circle formation. He grabbed Foster's hand and ran toward the rock formation while the creatures reformed behind them. They reached the defensive position just as Colonel Grant's main force began their fighting withdrawal from the base camp. The rocky outcrop provided natural cover from multiple directions, but Jake could see that the creatures were already adapting to this new tactical situation. As the survivors gathered in their new defensive position, Jake counted only 43 soldiers left alive. The creatures had cut their numbers by more than half in less than 4 hours. "They're not just hunting us," he told Colonel Grant as they set up the new perimeter. "They're farming us, taking what they need and discarding the rest." Grant looked out at the alien landscape where hundreds of the creatures now moved openly, no longer bothering to hide. "Then we make them pay for every harvest," she said grimly. Jake began placing explosive charges around the position while the others dug in for what might be their final battle. In the distance, the crystal formations pulsed faster and brighter, like a heartbeat building toward something terrible. 3 weeks on Kepler 442c had changed Jake Morrison in ways that scared him. He could move through the alien landscape without making a sound. His eyes had learned to see the creatures shimmer before they became fully solid. When danger approached, he felt it in his bones like an early warning system. The other survivors looked at him with a mixture of respect and fear. Only 30 soldiers remained alive. Jake crouched behind a rock formation and watched the creatures gather in the valley below their position. There were hundreds of them now, all wearing pieces of equipment from dead soldiers. They moved in perfect coordination like parts of a single organism. "They're planning something big," Lieutenant Foster said quietly beside him. She was the only other original member of his squad still alive. Pete Collins had died 2 days ago, holding off an attack that should have overrun their position. Captain Rodriguez was gone too, killed while trying to repair their long-range radio. Foster's research had revealed disturbing truths about their enemy. The creatures were not just copying human appearance and voices. They were absorbing human knowledge, learning everything the dead soldiers had known. Military tactics, equipment operation, even personal memories were being harvested and shared through the crystal network. "I found something," Foster whispered, showing Jake her scanner readings. "The trilithium deposits we came here to mine. They're not just mineral formations. They're part of the planet's brain." Jake studied the data on her screen. The trilithium nodes were positioned throughout the planet's crust in a pattern that looked exactly like neural pathways in a human brain. Each deposit connected to dozens of others through the crystal formations, creating a massive thinking system. "The whole planet is alive," Foster continued, "and we've been trying to mine its thoughts." Jake understood now why the creatures fought so desperately. Humans had not just invaded their world. They had tried to perform surgery on a living mind without anesthesia. Colonel Grant appeared beside them, her face grim. "I've been monitoring radio traffic from orbit. The fleet isn't coming back." Jake felt his heart sink, though part of him had expected this news. "How long do we have?" "Food and water for maybe another week. Less if we keep losing people at this rate." Grant looked out at the creatures massing below them. "But I've been thinking about Foster's discovery. If the trilithium network is really the planet's nervous system, then we might be able to hurt it." Jake followed her reasoning. "Destroy enough nodes and we could cause massive damage to the network." "Exactly. It might not kill the planet, but it could cripple its ability to coordinate these attacks." Foster looked worried. "The amount of explosives we'd need would be enormous, and we'd have to place charges simultaneously at multiple locations. If we attack one node, the others will be defended." Jake was already working out the logistics in his head. As their demolitions expert, he knew exactly how much explosive force would be needed. The problem was getting close enough to the nodes to place the charges. "I can do it," he said finally. "The tunnel system the creatures use connects to most of the major trilithium deposits. I've been mapping it during our raids." Grant stared at him. "That's a suicide mission, Morrison. Those tunnels are full of creatures." "Maybe, but I've learned to move like they do. I can get through." Foster grabbed his arm. "Jake, you've been changing. Have you looked at yourself lately? Jake had avoided mirrors for the past week, but he knew what she meant. His reflexes were too fast now. His night vision was better than any human's should be. Sometimes he caught himself moving in the same fluid way the creatures moved. The planet is trying to absorb you too, Foster said quietly. Just like it absorbed the others, you're becoming one of them. Jake looked down at his hands. In the alien light, his skin had a faint metallic sheen that had not been there before. Maybe that's what it takes to win. That night, Jake prepared for his mission into the tunnel system. He stripped down to essential gear, explosives, detonators, and a basic survival kit. No heavy armor that would slow him down, no weapons that had proven useless against the creatures. As he checked his equipment one last time, Colonel Grant approached him. Morrison, I want you to know something. This mission you're planning, it's not an order, it's your choice. Jake looked up at her. Ma'am, we came here to complete a mission. The objective has changed, but the mission hasn't. The mission was to extract trilithium and return home. We're not going home, Jake. No, ma'am. But we can make sure this planet never threatens human space again. Grant nodded slowly. Then make it count, soldier. Jake entered the tunnel system through a crack in the rocks near their defensive position. The passages were larger than he had expected, carved from solid stone by creatures that understood the planet's geology better than any human survey. The tunnels were not empty. As Jake moved deeper into the system, he could hear the creatures moving through parallel passages. But something had changed. They did not attack him immediately. Instead, they seemed to be following him, watching him, waiting for something. The first trilithium node was exactly where Foster's scans had indicated. The crystalline formation filled an entire chamber, pulsing with energy that made Jake's teeth ache. He placed his shaped charges carefully around the base of the formation, setting the timers for maximum coordination with the other nodes he planned to hit. As he worked, creatures emerged from the shadows to watch him. They made no move to stop him, but their presence was unnerving. Jake counted at least 20 of them, all wearing the faces of soldiers he had known. You understand now, said one that looked like Pete Collins. You feel the connection. The planet speaks to you. Jake ignored them and continued placing explosives, but he could feel what the creature meant. There was something in his mind now that had not been there before, a sense of the vast network that connected every living thing on Kepler 442c. The second node was deeper in the tunnel system. As Jake traveled through passages that seemed to shift and change around him, he realized the planet was guiding his path. It wanted him to reach the trilithium deposits. It wanted him to complete his mission. Why? He asked the empty tunnel. The answer came not in words, but in images that flashed through his mind. He saw the planet's history, billions of years of evolution, of life forms that had learned to think together as one organism. He saw the first human ships appearing in orbit, bringing the threat of mining and destruction. The planet had tried to communicate, but humans did not understand. So it had done the only thing it could. It had fought back. At the third node, Jake understood that the creatures had never been the real enemy. They were just antibodies, the planet's immune system responding to an infection. The real enemy was the fundamental incompatibility between human needs and planetary survival. He placed the charges anyway. The fourth node was the largest yet, a cathedral-sized chamber filled with crystalline structures that sang with harmonious energy. As Jake prepared his explosives, he felt the full weight of what he was about to destroy. This was not just a planet he was killing. This was a living mind that had taken millions of years to develop, a unique form of consciousness that would never exist again once it was gone. Jake set the timers and began his retreat toward the surface. Behind him, the creatures that had been following him throughout his journey began to sing. It was a sound unlike anything he had ever heard, beautiful and terrible at the same time. As he climbed toward the surface, Jake felt tears running down his face. He was not sure if they were his own tears or if the planet was crying through him. He reached the surface just as the first explosions began deep underground. The ground shook with massive tremors as the trilithium network started to collapse. Crystal formations across the landscape flickered and went dark as the connections between them were severed. Jake made it back to the defensive position as the final explosions rocked the planet. Around him, the surviving soldiers cheered as they watched the creatures stumble and fall, their coordination broken. But Jake felt no joy in their victory. He had won the battle by committing murder on a planetary scale, and deep in his changing mind, he could feel something dying that would never live again. The planet was dying around them. Jake watched from the rocky outcrop as massive cracks split the ground across the landscape. The crystal formations that had once pulsed with coordinated light now flickered randomly or went dark completely. Where the trilithium network had been destroyed, the very air seemed to shimmer with pain. The creatures were dying too. Without the network to coordinate them, they stumbled around like broken puppets. Many simply collapsed and turned to dust. Others wandered aimlessly, calling out in the voices of dead soldiers but with no purpose behind the words. "It's working," Colonel Grant said, watching the chaos through her binoculars. "The network is collapsing." Jake felt sick. The victory tasted like poison in his mouth. Around him, the 28 surviving soldiers celebrated their success, but all Jake could think about was the vast intelligence he had just murdered. Lieutenant Foster approached him with her scanner. "Jake, I need you to look at these readings." The device showed energy levels throughout his body that were far beyond normal human parameters. His cellular structure was changing, adapting to the planet's hostile environment in ways that should have been impossible. "You're not fully human anymore," Foster said quietly. "The planet has been changing you since we arrived. I think it was trying to create a bridge between our species." Jake looked down at his hands. The metallic sheen on his skin was more pronounced now. His fingernails had grown longer and harder. When he concentrated, he could still feel faint echoes from the damaged network. "Can you reverse it?" he asked. Foster shook her head. "Even if I could, I don't think you'd survive the process. The changes are too deep now." Before Jake could respond, the ground beneath them began to shake violently. Not the controlled tremors from his explosions, but something much more violent and random. The planet was having convulsions as its nervous system died. "We need to find shelter," Colonel Grant ordered. "Something's happening." They took cover in a cave system near their position just as the real catastrophe began. The planet's atmosphere started to change. The purple clouds turned black and began to fall as acid rain. The temperature swings became even more extreme, dropping and rising by over 100 degrees in minutes. Jake realized what was happening. With the trilithium network destroyed, the planet could no longer regulate its own systems. The careful balance that had kept Kepler 442c stable for millions of years was collapsing. "It's going to tear itself apart," Foster said, watching her instruments go wild. The planet maintained its ecosystem through the crystal network. Without it, everything falls apart. The acid rain dissolved their remaining equipment. The temperature swings cracked their weapons and made their protective suits fail. One by one, the surviving soldiers began to die from exposure to the increasingly hostile environment. Colonel Grant died first, her suit breached by a chunk of falling crystal. She handed Jake her command codes with hands that were already blistering from chemical burns. "Complete the mission, Morrison," she whispered. "Document everything. Make sure they know what happened here." Sergeant Williams died next, then Private Chen, then Lieutenant Baker. Each death left Jake more isolated, more alone with the dying planet around him. Foster lasted longer than the others, her scientific equipment giving her some protection from the environmental chaos. "Jake," she said during a brief lull in the acid storms, "I've been monitoring the orbital scans. The changes here are visible from space. The planet's surface is breaking apart." She showed him images from the emergency beacon's camera system. The beautiful world they had landed on 3 weeks ago was transforming into a hellscape. Continents were splitting, oceans were boiling away, the atmosphere was bleeding into space. "How long before it's completely dead?" Jake asked. "Days, maybe, hours. The gravitational stress is tearing the planet's core apart." Foster handed him a data recorder containing all their research and observations. "Someone needs to know what we found here. Someone needs to understand that this wasn't just a planet. It was alive." She died that night when her suit finally failed, completely. Jake held her hand as the toxic atmosphere burned away her lungs, listening to her final words about the wonders they had discovered and destroyed. Jake was alone. For 2 months, he survived on a planet that was actively trying to kill itself. His changed body could process the toxic atmosphere for short periods. His enhanced reflexes let him dodge falling debris and navigate the constantly shifting landscape. He was becoming something that could live in hell, because hell was all that remained. He used his time to document everything. Using equipment salvaged from the dead, he recorded detailed reports about the creatures, the network, and the planet's living consciousness. He wanted humanity to understand the magnitude of what they had destroyed. The emergency beacon he finally managed to repair was built from parts of 12 different communication devices. It took him 6 weeks to get it working, and by then the planet's surface was barely recognizable. Where forests of metal trees had once grown, there were now seas of molten rock. Where crystal formations had sung with living light, there were only craters filled with poisonous gas. Jake recorded his final message on the day the deep space salvage ship picked up his signal. "This is Staff Sergeant Jake Morrison, serial number 2847 Delta 7, reporting as the sole survivor of the Kepler 442c expedition. I am transmitting all data regarding our mission and its outcome. The planet designated as Class 13 Deathworld Kepler 442c was not just hostile to life, it was life. A single living organism that had achieved consciousness on a planetary scale." He paused, looking out at the devastated landscape through the beacon's camera. "We came here to mine trilithium. We ended up performing brain surgery on a living world without its consent. The creatures we fought were not invaders, they were antibodies. The planet was trying to defend itself against us." Jake's voice was steady as he continued his report, but inside he felt empty. He had won the war by committing genocide against an entire species that consisted of one individual. "I am no longer fully human. The planet changed me during our time here, possibly as an attempt at communication or adaptation. I can survive in environments that would kill normal humans, but I carry the memories of what we destroyed." When the salvage ship finally arrived, they found Jake sitting beside his beacon in the ruins of what had once been a living world. He was the only thing moving on a planet that had become a lifeless rock drifting through space. The rescue team was amazed that anyone could have survived on such a hostile world for so long. They had no idea that Jake had survived by becoming something that was no longer entirely human. On the journey back to human space, Jake wrote detailed reports that would change how humanity approached contact with alien worlds. His recommendations led to new protocols for determining planetary consciousness before beginning mining operations. But for Jake Morrison, the real victory was much smaller and more personal. He had kept his promise to Colonel Grant. He had completed the mission and made sure humanity understood what had happened on Kepler 442c. The planet was dead, its voice silenced forever. But its story would live on in Jake's reports, a warning about the price of victory and the responsibility that came with human power in the galaxy. Jake never returned to active duty. He became an advisor on alien contact protocols, using his unique experience to help prevent future tragedies. But late at night, when the wind was just right, he could still hear the dying song of Kepler 442c echoing in his changed mind. Some victories, he learned, were worse than any defeat.